to Chapter 4 to discuss two specific markets and the supply and demand and how equilibriums are reached in these two markets. So we're going to focus on labor and financial markets and do some very detailed analysis about the labor supply and demand. And our discussion topic this week is related to the labor market. It's about minimum wage. I believe you've all read the required reading and have some basic understanding of this question. When we look at labor, now if you think about the news that you've read, what's the labor condition in Taiwan right now? Is it easy to find people? If you're a business owner, is it easy to find people? No. What type of businesses are having the most difficulty finding workers? Very good. Restaurant. Restaurant owners are having difficulty finding waiters or waitresses. Do you know how much, if you work in a restaurant, do you know how much you get paid in Taipei? If you work in a restaurant, how much?
200
per hour, right? Actually, it's more. Running low on nurses, Taiwan. There's a lot of nurses quitting their jobs to go work for which country, guess? A lot of the nurses who can speak good English are actually going to where? To the US. Because if you work as a nurse, you get paid really well in the US. The average salary for nurses is $100,000 US. Some concepts for supply and demand in the labor market. So the labor market describes the market where workers and companies hire their required talents. So it's the supply and demand for workers. And the law of demand still applies here. Do you still remember what the law of demand is? The law of demand, simply put, is the higher the price, the demand. The higher the price, the lower the demand, right? So similar to far, we've learned two very important economic principles, how we make choices according to budget constraints and how we analyze supply and demand and equilibrium. Now, that's what theory says, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to apply what we've learned in theory to real world scenarios. So when we talk about price control or government regulation, one most commonly seen government price control is minimum wage. Now, we've had a lot of discussion about setting minimum wage can lead to unemployment. So from pure theoretical perspective, most economists would say, it's probably a bad idea. But if you look around the world, most countries have set a minimum wage. So we're looking at why we're doing that and how do we mitigate the possible negative influences of setting a minimum wage, and also how theory actually can be verified in real life. Right? Economists say there's going to be a lot of unemployment. Is it really happening, or something like that? So this gives us a lot of more opportunities to link what we learn in the book to what we really live and experience every day. Okay?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liz. This is Benjamin, and this is Bruce. And today we're going to talk about the minimum wage, how a $50 federal minimum wage can affect the economy. So before we start, I would like to ask you a question. Can you imagine that you work 40 hours a week and still live in poverty? Definitely not. This is the spirit behind the proposal to raise the U.S. federal minimum wage from $7.25 to $50 per hour. This is also a policy that could lift million people out of poverty, but can also cause millions of them to lose their job. So, in today's presentation, we'll cover a few parts. First, ways for the policymakers to weigh the trade-off. Second, debate of economy theories and how economists make their decisions, and sufficiency of Taiwan minimum wage and policy recommendations. So first, let's start with ways for the policymakers to weigh the trade-off. It is kind of hard to really understand the dilemma of using just words to describe the situation, so let's take a look at some statistics. According to the United States Congressional Budget Office, raising the federal minimum wage to $50 per hour could increase the earnings of about 27 million workers, and about 900,000 Americans could be lifted out of poverty. But it might also cause 1.4 million people to lose their jobs. So here's the dilemma. Should the government accept some job losses in exchange for helping a much larger group to earn a better living? Or should it avoid any risk of unemployment, even if it means millions remain underpaid? First, let's look briefly at how each side of people view this issue. For the supporters, they think that the high wage are worth the risk of losing a job. They believe that raising the minimum wage benefits people in several aspects. They think that it can reduce poverty, rise the living standard, narrow the pay gap, reduce welfare imbalance, increase productivity, and so on. For the opponent on the other side, they think it will increase the labor cost. And this will put a lot of pressure to some small businesses and may cause some businesses to shut down. And most importantly, it causes the job loss. We think that the severity of losing a job can be much greater than the gain of receiving a few extra dollars per hour. And there is also a new point of view presented by David Card, who won the 2021 Nobel Prize in Economics. His research shows that the raise in minimum wage for the fast food workers doesn't lead to job loss in some years, which is totally opposite from what most people think. So we can see that this is not a simple yes or no question. It's complex and it's about balance and making decisions. So back to our main question. How can policymakers weigh the benefits of high wage with the risk of job loss? There are two concepts for them to make a balanced decision. First, they start by analyzing the macroeconomic effect. Analyzing the macroeconomic effect means you look at the overall impact of the whole economic environment, including the growth, inflation, and productivity. For example, according to Keynesian theory, high wage may increase the aggregate demand. This means that when people earn more, they spend more, and it stimulates the business's growth and creates new jobs to offset some of the losses. It can also improve productivity. But however, there are also some possible downsides. From a classical economic point of view, if businesses face much higher labor costs, they might raise prices leading to inflation, or reduce hiring to cut costs, which could slow the economic growth in some industries. So at this stage, Policymakers weigh whether the risks in spending and productivity can offset inflation and slower growth. So when analyzing, policymakers can ask questions like, will higher wages stimulate enough consumer spending to support sustainable growth? Or will inflation and slower hiring outweigh the benefits? How can the government manage short-term inflation while still improving workers' living standards? Next, it's important to examine from the microeconomic perspective, focusing on who gains and who loses during these policies, including the individual, firms, and market behavior. For example, when the wage increases, not all workers are affected equally. From the labor demand theory, when wage rise, the cost of hiring workers also rises. Some employers, especially for the small businesses, might be forced to reduce their workforce or cut working hours to manage the cost, while the big businesses may not face this kind of dilemma. On the other hand, efficiency wage theory argues that higher pay can actually make workers more productive. Well-paid employees are usually more motivated.
And as Liz said earlier, it's very difficult for us to imagine what it's like to work for 40 hours a week and still be unable to make a living for yourself or for your family, since we live in relative wealthiness. But that is the reality for a lot of people who are living in the US, which is why they're pushing for a policy change, an increase in minimum wage. But policymakers are afraid of its consequences since it's unprecedented, and they're afraid of its effect on the job market. Like maybe some people would lose their jobs. And I'll be talking about the debate of economics theories, like the theories that the two economists provides, and also how to make decisions when even the experts are divided amongst themselves. Now, in the video, the two economists hold drastically different opinions. The one on the left, Aaron Du, believes that a wage increase would not affect the job market significantly, negatively. And the other one would say otherwise. So let's talk about Aaron's perspective first. He believes that a low-wage labor market can handle higher wages. Now, this can be due to several different reasons and economic assumptions. The first being that demand for low-wage labor is often inelastic or non-flexible. Since businesses need manpower, they can't just fire the employees without hurting their productivity and day-to-day business operations, because they need that employee, they need those manpower, they need those low-wage workers to keep their day-to-day operations going. So with a wage increase which is why he comes to the conclusion that a wage increase doesn't trigger unemployment. Now, the second reason being labor markets are a monopsony. Now, monopsonies are basically markets where there's only one buyer. Now, since there are a lot of people looking for jobs, but only so few job offers opened in businesses, the businesses ultimately have more power over, for example, like how much they pay their workers. Which is why he comes to the conclusion that raising the minimum wage would not affect the companies since they're already paying below the standard rate. And overall, his idea is one that focuses more on the fact that a wage increase would only correct the imbalances that already currently exists in the job market. Now, on the other hand, Michael Stream believes that a wage increase would devastate the job market and could even lead to job losses far greater than what was estimated in the CBO report. Now, his idea is one that uses a more competitive market approach perspective. What this means is that the market is based on supply and demand, So basically, as a price for something goes up, the demand for it goes down. So in this example, in the job market, as wages go up, business demands for less workers. And the second reason being he believes that the current wages already reflect a worker's productivity. And businesses can't really afford to pay the workers more if the wages go up higher, which leads to job loss, which is why he talks about the earned income tax credit as a better way to reduce poverty. He believes that a lot of poverty comes from the fact that a lot of people are unemployed. And even if the minimum wage was to go up, it wouldn't affect them at all, since they're unemployed anyway. Now, this is a system where the government would give money back to the working people from like tax collections. And since it only rewards the working people, it would encourage more people to find jobs in order to get this money. Now, I think one thing that's really important from all of this is that these different economics assumptions and predictions are all based on like theories and models. But I think it's more important that we rely not just on abstract theories and models, but actually rely on real-world data and statistics. For example, these 6 U.S. cities, being Chicago, Washington, D.C., Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, and Seattle, they've been gradually increasing their minimum wage ever since 2013. And by 2018, they've all increased their minimum wages to above $10. And in this 10% increase, they've seen 1.3 to 2.5% increase in average earnings. However, the employment rate is less clear. It ranges anywhere from 0.3% decrease in employment to 1.1 increase in employment.